these are, military objects, etc. It's been an extremely restricted sort of policy that's been adopted that has had the effect of bringing the population to the brink of starvation. And that was within the control of Israel to do differently. And it's not that they are in control of that full perimeter. Those are their people, and they're responsible for them to continue to survive.
27 nations, as well as the UK, have called on Israel to end its war in Gaza. They've condemned the killing of civilians and said the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. The call comes as Israel has begun a new offensive in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, one of the few parts of the enclave that have been untouched until now. Let's talk to Stephen Rapp. He's a former US ambassador at large for war crimes issues under President Obama. What do you make, first of all, of this joint statement from the UK and 27 other nations? Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening. Good to be with you. It's a quite powerful statement from countries that have generally been quite sympathetic to Israel and certainly all supportive of its right to exist, but to have major Western countries like the United Kingdom and France and Australia and Canada and 23 others speak out so strongly, I think is something that would give, I think, the Israeli government and certainly every Israeli and every supporter of Israel, I think, real pause.
Do you think, though, that it will make any difference in terms of what is happening on the ground? You say it will give them pause for thought, but at the moment it doesn't look as though the Israelis have any intention of heeding these calls.
Well, certainly that's the fear, and certainly that's been the pattern. I mean, obviously, we've had, since Israel broke the ceasefire in March, the one that was pressed on it by President Trump when he came into office, and the government not wanting to move forward to the sort of second phase that was contemplated. Since then, we've had this a period of more than 2 months of absolute humanitarian blockade of food and water, which, in earlier times, one could debate the question of whether there was starvation or attempted starvation of the population. It became quite abundant after March that was the policy. Now, in the after a certain period of time and under pressure from, frankly, U.S. senators that contacted the Netanyahu administration, they began this program represented by GHF and occasionally by UN convoys of humanitarian assistance, but of course into a very desperate population that food is a matter of life or death, and so naturally you expect people to rush any aid emplacement, and then we've had these reports, at least in the Gaza Health Ministry, of more than 700 people killed while they're seeking aid, and the amount of aid that's being distributed being only a fraction of what's necessary for the population's subsistence. And so, and despite that, the offensives continue. I think at the moment, many of us looking at the political situation hope that with the Knesset adjourning next Sunday, and with pressure, not that I've seen the administration other than in January putting hard pressure on Netanyahu to sign a ceasefire. I'm anticipating that we may finally have at least a ceasefire and half the hostages released and some humanitarian relief.
You mentioned the hostages.
That hope could be dashed. I recognize.
You mentioned the hostages there. When we were talking about this a little earlier on the programme, several of our listeners got in touch to say, look, Hamas could just release the end of the remaining hostages and sign up to a ceasefire. But do you think that there should be this continued pressure on Hamas to do just that?
Well, I mean, first of all, the taking of hostages is a war crime. Innocent people young and old. Some, of course, were murdered. 1,000 were murdered in the process, but being brought into captivity, not combatants, not prisoners of war. And then, of course, treated as bargaining chips with now, sort of half those that are left are reportedly dead. I mean, this is a horrific crime, and no one who looks at the conduct of Israel um, should get it wrong that the crimes of Hamas are horrendous. Hamas has brought enormous destruction on the people of Gaza, intentionally, in order to create this sort of image of their martyrdom. But that's a different issue than the tactics that Israel is using, which, of course, in a war under international humanitarian law, under laws that have been in effect for 160 years, both sides have to comply with the laws of war, whether the other side does or not.
And when you see
providing food and nourishment to the population, siege warfare like the 14th century isn't allowed anymore.
Yeah, and this statement from these countries says the Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable. Israel must comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. When you look at what is happening, the desperate scenes that we are seeing, the numbers of people who've been killed as they, for understandable reasons, just try and storm these aid distribution centres. This letter describes it as the drip feeding of aid. I mean, do you think that what is happening there in itself amounts to a breach of international law?
Well, as described, I mean, first of all, what the minister said is absolutely correct in terms of international law. I mean, when you talk, if you had the Israeli defenders here, they would say, well, Hamas is stealing it, Hamas is interfering with the distribution of aid, et cetera. That there are conditions that the Israelis don't control that are beyond their control. But there are clearly things that can be done, and the ways. I'm a board member of Physicians for Human Rights. We put out a report last week about how basic medical equipment wasn't coming in. People were, doctors couldn't bring in, screws and plates and things to repair people's limbs, and so almost every case becomes an amputation one. And when baby formula is taken away, I mean, these are, military objects, et cetera. It's been an extremely restricted sort of policy that's been adopted that has had the effect of bringing the population to the brink of starvation. And that was within the control of Israel to do differently. And it's not that they are in control of that full perimeter. Those are their people, and they're responsible for them to continue to survive. The focus is going after Hamas and the military targets. And of course, very important for them to defeat Hamas. But that has to be done consistent with humanitarian principles. And that's, this is...
And do you think Israel is not doing that at the moment?
That have dealt with international humanitarian law.
And the one person who could have a real sway over Benjamin Netanyahu in all of this would be President Trump, the US president. Would you like to see President Trump adopting a similar tone to that which we've seen from Britain and 27 other countries, saying to the Israelis that their approach to this is wrong and needs to change?
Well, I don't expect President Trump to use that language, to be frank. But I'd like him to adopt a high-pressure position, like, frankly, the U.S. did in response to the Israeli bombing of Damascus last week in the Ministry of Defense, which the U.S. basically said was unjustified and not something that the U.S. approved in. And then the U.S. pressed very, very hard for a truce between the parties and an end to the hostilities that were taking place in Soweto. So far, that is working. The U.S. was quite clear in that situation. And I think the U.S. should also be clear here. I think President Trump is very sympathetic to President Netanyahu. He's spoken about his criminal prosecution and his desire to have it end, et cetera, et cetera. And is sympathetic to his difficulties in terms of his coalition. And he may be giving him time until, even though he's lost the Haredi parties, et cetera, until the end of the current parliament, so he doesn't face the possibility of a no confidence vote. But then I really hope that President Trump brings pressure on him to enter into this ceasefire agreement, and not just phase one, but phase two, an end to the war in Gaza, the reconstruction of Gaza under the proper administration, and then toward a political solution in Palestine. Those are
Stephen Rapp, former US ambassador at large for war crimes issues under President Obama. It's been great to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, take care now.